Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Return of Great Power Rivalry, Democracy versus Autocracy from the Ancient World to the U.S. and China, by Matthew Kroenig, narrated by Joel Richards. Preface. In August 2008, I began my job as an assistant professor at Georgetown University. A few weeks later, Lehman Brothers Bank collapsed, and the world found itself in the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. The American economic model was badly tarnished, and the Chinese state-led capitalism approach looked better in comparison. Many began to ask whether China possessed the superior economic and political system. Moreover, some wondered whether the days of U.S. global leadership were coming to an end, and China might soon become the world's leading global economic and geopolitical power. I became fascinated by this possibility and its implications for global geopolitics. A few semesters later, I taught a PhD seminar in Advanced International Relations Theory. The syllabus covered cutting-edge research published in the field's best journals. Over the past few decades, social scientists have been obsessed with studying whether democracies are different from autocracies with regard to specific types of international political behavior, and my course focused intensely on these debates. Many of the studies found that democracies are better at a number of discrete functions: economic growth, international finance, alliance building, and warfare. I made a connection between these sets of issues. If it is the case that democracies perform better in all of these discrete issue areas, then should they not also perform better overall? If so, then it stood to reason that the United States was actually much better positioned for the coming competition with China than many experts and pundits seem to believe. I wanted to further investigate this intriguing and potentially important insight. This book is the result. I have aimed to write a book that will advance scholarly debates about great power competition, while also appealing to a broader readership. Accomplishing either of these tasks on its own would be challenging, and attempting to do both is ambitious. Still, I have done my best to speak to both audiences. I hope political scientists will excuse me for not clogging the narrative with extensive digressions into scholarly literature and research methodology. My apologies to non-political scientists for the occasional discussions of variables and the presentation of some simple statistics. My name is on the cover of this book, but many other institutions and individuals helped to make it possible. Many thanks to my home academic institution, Georgetown University. We often appear at or near the top of rankings for the world's best programs in international relations and foreign affairs. If the ranking is deserved, the credit should go to our ambitious and talented students, who frequently amaze me with the impressive feats they accomplish after leaving campus. From our classrooms, students have gone on to become members of Congress, ambassadors, military officers, professors, White House officials, and much more. I am relieved that my influence has not yet been too great an obstacle to their progress. I am also grateful to the Atlantic Council, where I am currently the Deputy Director of the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. Sitting in on discussions with current and former high-level policymakers is a type of daily fieldwork into the people, ideas, and developments shaping contemporary international relations. These interactions have also helped to inspire and inform my writing, and have forced me to ground my arguments in reality, while also drawing out concrete implications for contemporary policy debates. For constructive feedback on parts of this book, I thank participants at seminars at the American Political Science Association annual meeting, the Atlantic Council, Georgetown University, and Princeton University. The concepts for this book were initially sketched in an essay in The National Interest, and I am grateful to the editors for the right to expand on those themes in this longer opus. Mark Schaefer, a junior fellow at the Atlantic Council, was the best research assistant I could have hoped for, and made significant contributions at every stage of this book project. Thanks also to the Smith-Richardson Foundation and the Hertog Foundation for providing me with the resources necessary to transform my previous work on this subject into a book manuscript for broader public consumption. Other research assistance was provided by Anastasia Casarias, Jake Gallant, Hilary Papa, Luan Tian, Christian Trotti, Mark Massa, and Lorenzo Lau. This book would not have been possible without the loving support of my family. Olivia, you have sacrificed much in order to be a superb wife to me and mother to Eleonora. For that there is no way I can fully repay you, but I am trying my best. Finally, I would like to celebrate my daughter Eleonora. You can achieve anything you set your mind to, and if the argument of this book is correct, you can do it right here in the United States of America. This book is dedicated to you. Introduction. The United States of America has been the most powerful country in the world for the past 75 years. But will Washington's reign as the world's leading superpower continue? At the end of World War II, the United States and its victorious allies built the world we know today. American military supremacy deterred great power war and undergirded international peace and security. The U.S. economy was a consistent source of technological innovation, an engine for global growth, and a model for how other countries structure their domestic markets and politics. Democratic forms of governments, inspired by the United States, spread around the world, and by the late 2000s, more people were living under freedom than at any time in world history. U.S. diplomats led the way in erecting the international institutions that govern contemporary global politics, including the United Nations, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and the World Trade Organization. And U.S. culture permeated the globe from blue jeans, Hollywood, and Coca-Cola during the Cold War, to hip-hop, the National Basketball Association, and Instagram today. These cultural contributions provided the United States with a significant reservoir of soft power and made planet Earth a richer and more vibrant home. To be sure, Washington's leadership was not uncontested. During the Cold War, from 1945 to 1989, it faced an intense geopolitical competitor in the form of the Soviet Union. But the Berlin Wall came crashing down, leaving the United States as the globe's sole and undisputed hegemon. It would not be an exaggeration to say that from 1989 to 2014, the United States may have been the world's most dominant state at any time since ancient Rome. But all of this may be coming to an end. After 25 years of virtually uncontested U.S. global leadership, Russia and China have emerged as great power competitors. In recent years, Russia has invaded its neighbors, Ukraine and Georgia, and intervened forcefully in Syria, establishing itself as a Middle Eastern power broker for the first time since the 1970s. Fueled by petrodollars, Russian President Vladimir Putin has made modernization of the Russian military a top priority. He has built a formidable force, and a U.S. think tank recently estimated that if Putin decided to invade, he could take the capitals of two NATO allies, Estonia and Latvia, within 60 hours. Putin is interfering in Western politics, including the 2016 U.S. presidential election, with the objective of discrediting democracy and weakening the NATO alliance. He has declared the collapse of the Soviet Union the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century, and his promises to resurrect a greater Russia could very well force a major clash with the United States and its allies. The challenge from China is even more daunting. Since putting in place sound economic reforms in the 1970s, China's economy has expanded at eye-popping rates. It is now the world's second-largest economy, and many economists predict that China could surpass the United States within the decade. China's state-led capitalism model of economic growth is proving more appealing to many around the world than the U.S. template of free markets and open politics. In addition, military prowess often follows economic might, and China is plowing its economic gains into military hardware. The balance of power in East Asia has greatly shifted in recent years, and some U.S. military planners doubt whether the United States still has the ability to defend long-standing allies and partners in the region, such as Taiwan. China is projecting its power further afield, conducting military exercises with Russia in Europe and establishing military outposts in Africa and Latin America. Beijing is making major infrastructure investments around the world, expanding its economic and political clout in every major world region, including Europe. It is also asserting itself politically on the world stage, with President Xi Jinping disingenuously presenting China as a champion of free trade, clean energy, and respect for global norms. China is not shy about its ambitions. Indeed, its leaders promise that by 2049, the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, China will be a global superpower. Many believe that things look grim for the United States. CNN host Fareed Zakaria may represent the conventional wisdom when he announced several years ago that we are entering a post-American world. Some predict that after America, the world will return to a multipolar balance of power system among multiple competing great powers, each lording it over its own respective sphere of influence. Others forecast a rising China usurping global mastery from the United States. Or, perhaps most frighteningly, a power transition between a rising China and declining America could result in World War III. Harvard scholar Graham Allison is one of many who believes these two giants may be destined for war. Washington is belatedly awakening to these challenges to its global leadership. After 2 decades of squandering strategic attention and resources, fighting in the desert in Iraq and Afghanistan, Washington announced in the 2017 National Security Strategy of the United States of America that great power competition with Russia and China is now the #1 threat to U.S. security and economic well-being. How will this competition play out? Is China bound to lead, as many now seem to believe? Are we returning to a multipolar balance of power system, in which Russia, China, and the United States will establish spheres of influence within their own respective regions? Or will Washington manage to fend off these formidable competitors and refresh its position as the world's leading superpower? To answer these questions, we lack a crystal ball. But history and political theory can serve as a guide, and they suggest a clear answer. Democracies enjoy a built-in advantage in long-run geopolitical competitions. The idea that democracies are better able to accumulate and maintain power in the international system has a distinguished pedigree. Herodotus, Machiavelli, and Montesquieu are among the classical political thinkers who argue that republican forms of government are best able to harness available domestic resources toward national greatness. And recent social science research concurs. For the past 2 decades, cutting-edge research in economics and political science has been obsessed with the issue of whether democracies are different, and the consistent finding is that they perform a number of key functions better than their autocratic counterparts. They have higher, long-run rates of economic growth. They are better able to raise money in international capital markets and become international financial centers. They build stronger and more reliable alliances. They are more likely to make and keep international agreements. They are less likely to fight wars, at least against other democracies, and they are more likely to win the wars that they fight. This book takes this line of thinking a step further by aggregating these narrower findings into a broader argument about the relative fitness of democracy and autocracy in great power political competitions. The central claim of this book is that democracies do better in major power rivalries. After all, it is not much of a logical leap to assume that states that outperform on important economic, diplomatic, and military tasks will do better in long-run geopolitical competitions than those that do not. According to this view, the very constraints on government power and a strict rule of law system that some may see as signs of democratic weakness are, in fact, democracy's greatest strengths. In other words, this book makes the hard power case for democracy. The argument is not that democracy is a superior system because it protects human rights and civil liberties. although it does that too. Rather, this book argues that democratic countries are better able to amass power, wealth, and influence on the world stage than their autocratic competitors. Democracy is a force multiplier that helps states punch above their weight in international geopolitics. This hunch is supported by the empirical record. As this book will show, autocrats often put up a good fight, but they fail to ultimately seize lasting global leadership. Xerxes, Napoleon, Nazi Germany, and the Soviet Union are among the examples of authoritarians that launched campaigns for world domination, but came up short. On the other hand, states with relatively more open forms of government have often been able to establish themselves as the international system's leading state, from Athens and the Roman Republic in the ancient world to the British Empire and the United States in more recent times. According to some scholars, the world's leading state since the 1600s has also been among its most democratic. It is hard to argue with an undefeated record of 4 centuries and counting. Indeed, a leitmotif of this book is that the history of Western civilization can be thought of as the passing of the torch of liberal hegemony from Athens to Rome, to Venice, Amsterdam, and London, and on to its current resting place in Washington, D.C. America's greatest strength in its coming competition with Russia and China, therefore, is not its military might or economic heft, but its institutions. For all of its faults, America's fundamentals are still better than Russia's and China's. There is good reason to believe, therefore, that the American era will endure and the autocratic challenges posed by China and Russia will run out of steam. The idea that democracies dominate may seem counterintuitive. After all, throughout history and in contemporary policy debates, many have argued that dictators have a foreign policy advantage. Autocrats can be ruthless when necessary, but democracies are constrained by public opinion and ethical and legal concerns. Autocrats take decisive action, but democracies dither in endless debate. Autocrats strategically plan for the long term, while democracies cannot see beyond a 2 or 4 year election cycle. Many today laud Russia and China's autocratic systems for precisely these reasons. Russians play chess, and Chinese play Go, but Americans play checkers, as the aphorism has it. It is true that autocracies are better at taking swift and bold action, but impulsive decisions uninformed by vigorous public debate often result in spectacular failure. Hitler, for example, was able to harness new technology to create blitzkrieg warfare and conquer much of Western Europe in the early stages of World War II. But he also foolishly invaded Russia and declared war on the United States. Unfortunately for autocracies, this story is all too common. As Machiavelli wrote in his Discourses on Livy in the 16th century, "Fewer errors will be seen in the people than in the prince, and those lesser and having greater remedies. Hence it arises that a republic has greater life and has good fortune longer than a principality." There is good reason to hope that this argument is true, because continued American leadership would be beneficial to the United States and the rest of the free world. The decline of American power would certainly be unwelcome for the United States. Americans have grown accustomed to the benefits that accrue to the world's leading power. But billions of others also have a stake in America's success. For all of its faults, the United States has been a fairly benevolent hegemon. While far from perfect, it has gone to extraordinary lengths to provide security, promote economic development, and nurture democracy and human rights. The world is certainly safer, richer, and freer today than it was before the dawn of the American era. Indeed, China itself has been among the greatest beneficiaries of a U.S.-led international order. American military and economic power have provided the peace and macroeconomic stability that allowed China to grow into the major power that it is today. There is little reason to believe that Russia and China will be as kind. These autocratic powers long to establish spheres of influence in their near abroad, and they have shown little concern for the sovereignty or personal freedoms of their own citizens or subjected populations. To get a vision of a world led by Russia or China, just look at how they treat the people that fall under their influence today. Russian dictator Vladimir Putin invades neighboring countries and murders critical journalists. And China takes contested territory from its neighbors through brute force and locks up 1 million Muslim minorities in re-education camps. And this is but a small taste of the brutality of these governments. If readers doubt these claims, they can simply ask citizens of American allies in Eastern Europe or East Asia whether they desire continued American leadership or whether they would prefer to live under the thumb of Moscow or Beijing, respectively. Moreover, just as consequentially for the globe, the decline of the United States could very well result in war. As noted earlier, international relations theory maintains that the decline of one dominant power and the rise of another often results in great power conflict. According to this telling, World War I and World War II were primarily the result of the decline of the British Empire and the rise of Imperial and then Nazi Germany. Falling powers fight preventive wars in a bid to remain on top, and rising powers launch conflicts to dislodge the reigning power and claim their place in the sun. Many fear that a power transition between Beijing and Washington would produce a similar catastrophic result. Continued American leadership, therefore, could forestall this transition and may be necessary for continued peace and stability among the major powers. There are many other works on related subjects, but this book is distinctive. Since the time of Aristotle, scholars have debated the virtues and vices of democratic versus autocratic constitutions, and some, including Machiavelli in his masterpiece Discourses on Livy, argue that republican forms of government were better suited for international ascendance. But these arguments have not been updated with the latest advances in social science research, nor applied to contemporary cases, like the United States, Russia, and China. Other scholars have written about whether the American era is coming to an end or enduring, but they do not provide a generalizable argument for why great powers rise and fall, or inform their understanding of the current situation with a systematic study of historical cases. For Reed Zacarias' The Post-American World, and Joseph Nye's Is the American Century Over, despite coming to opposite conclusions, serve as dueling prime examples of this kind of work. Others have written about the rise of China and its implications for the future of international politics, but similarly, they do not embed this analysis in a broader story about what determines the outcomes of long-run geopolitical competitions historically and theoretically. Henry Kissinger's On China fits this description. There are many good books on contemporary Russia, including Michael McFaul's From Hot War to Cold Peace, but none make their central focus the question of how Russia's domestic political institutions affect its ability to project power and influence on the international stage, or compete with the United States and China. International relations power transition theory, including Graham Allison's Destined for War, deals with the conditions under which power transitions cause great power war, but they largely take the rise of one power and decline of another as a given, and do not conduct a systematic investigation into the prior question of why these power transitions happen in the first place. Paul Kennedy's magisterial work, The Rise and Fall of the Great Powers, describes a long cycle of great power competition, but, like other works in this genre, his historical approach does not provide a clear social scientific explanation of the root causes of power in international affairs, and, since the book was published decades ago, he does not focus on the contemporary great power competition among the United States, Russia, and China. Finally, there has been much social science research on a possible democratic advantage in discrete areas, such as economic growth and war outcomes, but none has aggregated these mid-range findings into a broader theory about democratic advantages in long-run, great power competitions. Doron Acemoglu and James Robinson's Why Nations Fail, for example, focuses on how open institutions affect economic growth, and Democracies at War by Alan Stamm and Dan Ryder explains the democratic wartime advantage. But these works do not tell the larger story of democratic fitness for great power competition across a wide range of economic, political, and military dimensions. In sum, this book is distinctive in at least 4 ways. First, it provides an innovative argument about how domestic political institutions are the key to a state's ability to amass power and influence in the international system. Second, it studies the causes of power transitions, or in other words, it seeks to explain why great powers sometimes ascend to and maintain their position atop the international system, and are at other times surpassed by rivals. Third, it tests this argument with a sweeping historical analysis of democratic and autocratic competitors, from ancient Greece through the Cold War. Fourth, and finally, it employs this framework to understand and analyze the state of today's competition between the democratic United States and its autocratic competitors, Russia and China. The findings of this book have implications, not just for those in the ivory tower, but also for those working in the corridors of power. It suggests that despite all the talk of American decline, the United States is well positioned to remain the world's leading nation for the foreseeable future. History also shows, however, that while democracies tend to win in the end, the path from here to there can get messy. Washington must, therefore, prepare to defend itself and its allies from the serious Russian and Chinese threats in the meantime. And this book lays out a strategy for doing just that. Furthermore, this book recommends that U.S. leaders take seriously growing concerns about a possible erosion in the quality of American democracy. Washington must be careful to nurture its greatest source of strength, its democratic institutions. The book will continue in 4 parts. Part 1 lays out the central argument. It draws on ideas from the political philosophy canon and the latest social science research to advance the idea that democracies do better in long-run geopolitical competitions. It also considers and critiques the competing arguments about a possible autocratic advantage. The second part of the book examines the empirical basis for this idea through simple quantitative analysis and a historical study of democratic and autocratic competitors from the ancient world to the present. Specifically, the book will examine the following 7 cases: Athens, Sparta, and Persia, the Roman Republic, Carthage, and Macedon, the Venetian Republic, the Byzantine Empire, and the Duchy of Milan, the Dutch Republic and the Spanish Empire, Britain and France in the 18th and 19th centuries, the United Kingdom and Germany in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. This section of the book does not show that democracies always achieve everlasting hegemony, but it does demonstrate that they tend to excel in great power rivalry, and for the precise reasons identified by the theoretical framework. Part 3 is the real payoff of the book. What does all of this mean for contemporary international politics? This section examines the United States, Russia, and China. It studies how their domestic political systems prepare them for the coming competition, and finds that U.S. institutions are a continuing source of strength, while Russian and Chinese institutions are dragging down their attempts to amass international wealth and power. Part 4 takes stock of what we have learned and draws out the implications for U.S. foreign policy, and also looks ahead to the future. How can the United States best shore up its sources of strength? How can, or should, it seek to exploit its opponent's weaknesses? And, given the previous arguments, will the American era endure? Part 1. Democracy versus Autocracy. Chapter 1. The Democratic Advantage in Theory. Niccolò Machiavelli was the political genius of the Italian Renaissance. When people recall this remarkable period of artistic productivity and intellectual flourishing, they often emphasize the scientists, painters, architects, and sculptors: Leonardo, Raphael, Brunelleschi, and Michelangelo. But Machiavelli was the Michelangelo of politics. Like his contemporaries in the arts, Machiavelli ushered his field out of the Dark Ages and into the modern world. He is often considered the first modern political scientist, and among the first realist international relations scholars. Machiavelli was born into a middle-class family in the Santo Spirito neighborhood of Florence, Italy, in 14...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?